Any other questions about interrupt handling at the moment? Easy peasy until you actually try it. It may look a little different. Next abstraction level up, adding hardware timers. And in principle, Ada offers an interface to hardware timers on high-level language. It looks like that. In practice, that's not that often used. Why?
Is it correct in saying it's not implemented on Linux?
Yeah, on Linux it's not implemented anyway. It cannot possibly be implemented on Linux. How can it possibly be implemented on Linux? Why wouldn't it be implemented on Linux? How could it be done?
I don't know.
Okay, the key term is hardware timers. Yeah, but that's the point. And I mean, having a timer, I don't need that kind of interface. If I want to have access to the time, I have my delay statement. Right? I don't need anything further for that. If I want to have an explicit trigger based on a specific time, interrupt, hardware timer, directly doing something, I need hardware support for that one. Now, your desktop machine doesn't even have hardware timers. So, no surprise, this is not working in Linux. But my question is a little different. Even if you do have hardware timers, often this kind of interface is not used. Why? Because that's not using dynamic dispatching. That's fine. That's not a problem. No, that would be fine. The issue is actually much more trivial, namely that if you do have hardware timers in your system, they're usually not only just able to set a time, trigger a specific routine, but they do a whole range of other stuff at the same time. If you start looking up the reference manual in the timer section, it may probably look to you as quite a horror show to start with, because the number of possibilities and options for hardware timers which they offer you is tremendous in real practical systems. And this is only the smallest common denominator. In most cases where you do use hardware timers, use a lot more facilities than only triggering a specific routine. Okay. Otherwise, it is used, but not that frequently used in more complex environments. Okay. You do understand the difference between using a hardware timer and using a delay until statement? That makes sense? Hardware timer, delay until statement. How different that is? I see two modest nodding. Somebody wants to explain? Enlighten us, you nodded.
It's going to be more precise, I think. And it doesn't have to be scheduled.
Is it more precise? Which one?
Oh, the hardware timer would be more precise because it doesn't have all the delays you're talking about where you have to unschedule another task to put your delay set back.
Point is, hardware timer is completely predictable unless you mask out a specific interrupt priority. They have full control, very precise timing control. Delay until statement has what kind of semantic? It delays at least this and that much amount of time. No further guarantees beyond that point. That's a completely different semantic from you have to guarantee that this timer runs over. I will have a notification right at this point. Completely different semantic.
You said that the specification doesn't guarantee the delay until will be any time, but before.
Yeah.
Sorry, it'll only guarantee it
Yeah.
after that certain time. It doesn't guarantee that it will be lagging after that time.
Yes, but this has nothing to do with ADA. This is just a general concept. If you have a delay, sleep, whatever it's called, statement which has to go through the scheduler can have lots of other hobbies on the side. You have no control over that.
The kind of scheduler would this in a priority something? You can go, I need to get back to this at this point. It
Yes.
might move it slowly or whatever, but
Yes. You still have the possibility that, okay. If you have priorities, that's one thing which you desperately need for that. And you put this task which waits until for this on the highest priority level. You know that there is no communication or interference with another task at the same time. Yes, you can construct these cases, and still it only works for one task to do that. So the general semantic is at least that much, and in very special cases you can force it to be a little bit more responsive. It will still not have the same responsiveness than a hardware timer because you have a full context switch. So even in the most ideal case, you have simply more overhead to go through in that situation. Okay. Any other questions on timers? You will likely use them, and you will use them in concert with a number of other modules in your system, particularly I/O operations and DMA operations. If you program that nicely, you will have half of your job done by the hardware modules for you without the CPU being involved at all. You look skeptical? No. Okay. Yeah?
So with the connectors, design says they're hooked up to ESOP pins.
Say again?
It says they're connected up to serial lines in the ESOP pins.
The adapter board. The adapter board has a separate user out in it, which you can use for your own purposes. But you don't have to. So you can use that thing for debugging if you like, completely independent of the main board.
Yeah, but I mean
Yeah.
for just outputting to those ports.
To those ports. No, that you don't need to go through a user for that. Those ports are, the circuit diagram is also on the website, I think. Those ports are directly wired to GPIO pins.
Right.
And they are just decoupled for your comfort, so that you have a differential line driver on these boards, and you can short circuit them. They have a thermal and current overload protection. It's literally impossible to burn them down. We put this for the computer scientists, so the engineers wouldn't have needed that one. But we put that in place so that you experiment a little bit more at ease. So if you wire something wrongly on those ports, you don't have a chance to burn things down. While if you work directly on the GPIO ports, it's still hard, but you can actually burn them down. Okay. That's the only electrical connection there. By the way, you can test your eyesight on these things. No criticism about my soldering. Any criticism of my course, you fail the course straight away. But if you look at the little black spots on the wires to your board, there's actually a writing on these little black dots here. If you can read that, I can certify you 20/20 eyesight. Test.
What are you talking about?
You have to get the main board off.
Right, so
Yeah. Oops. Okay. So if you look at the 8 little black dots towards on the wires towards the ports, you found them? Okay. Your facial expression says that yes, I can confirm they're black. Yes. Oh, you all have spent too much time in dark rooms with computer monitors.
3500.
Say again?
3500 for heart rate.
Very close. Almost.
Yeah.
Oh, that one. Yeah, now
You
it's...
think like that, and there's lots of dots on here.
Okay. Okay, you're pretty good.
3500.
No. But very close. You try to use your glasses as microscopes? Just try to hire more people for soldering these boards next time. Because it takes me a few minutes to solder these boards every time. There's 390 written on them.
Yeah.
So 35 is as close as you can get. All right, that distracted me a bit. Asynchronous transfer of control. Now you all really want to find out what's written on these things. Don't try to find out what's written on the capacitors. That's not your eyesight. There's actually nothing written on them. Don't torture yourself for that. It's also always funny when you solder these little things together and they're just as small as little crumbs, and somebody bumps on the table and all of your 5 capacitors goes all over the place. You can just throw them away because you have no chance in hell to find out what they are afterwards. All right, back to asynchronous transfer of control. So what happens? Did you actually understand what asynchronous transfer of control means? If the trigger can be completed straight away, all the statements following the trigger are being executed, and that's it. That's the easy part. Right? If the trigger does not go through, then this specific task is blocked. At least it pretends to be blocked while it continues to run in the abortable section of the statement sequence. If the abortable part completes before the trigger gets through, this is again the harmless version. So far everything behaved, either you get the call through or you get the statement sequence through. It's quite similar to a select or else. Right? But if the trigger is completed before the abortable part is through, that's the whole point of a statement, then the abortable statement sequence is interrupted and aborted right in the middle of it. Okay. Have you understood that? A little bit about the exception handling constraints in there. Exceptions are also interrupted and aborted. If you have exception handling running in the time when you do the abort, the exception handling is also lost. Or the exception propagation itself can also be lost.
So, really, on Linux computers, everyone's separate threads on the two sections. How does it work on the hardware?
They're not running separate threads on different sections. No. They're not getting schizophrenic in opening different threads. It's only leaving, because the thread which actually waits for the entry to go through does not need to be an actual thread. It doesn't run. Now there is a bit of a problem if you implement this on a POSIX environment. because transferring writes in POSIX is complicated or impossible. And sometimes for that reason you will have seen multiplication of threads in some environments. So it could actually happen in POSIX environments for the reason that you cannot transfer writes. But logically, there's never ever multiple codes running in parallel in that statement. So, is that the same thing? Does it have the same effect? Depends on what?
Like, the above statement for the triggers can sometimes take a while to go through. So, like, if T and D are close to each other, it'll sometimes do one and sometimes together, depending on like how long the build statement actually takes to process.
Is the overall result of those two select statements the same though? You're not quite so sure. You're sure? They are equivalent. So that's actually the same thing. Let's go a little bit more interesting. Are those the same? Let's break it up. We have triggers, standard code sections, and abortable code sections. Just color it in a little bit to make it a bit more readable. And I swapped out the delay statement with the entry call in the first two. Otherwise they're the same. Like I swapped out the delay and the delay until the previous one. Now on the right side I also have a delay, but not in an abortable part, but in an OR part. Are they going to behave the same? Would you be able to analyze that, what's going on here?
It's not going to be the same. But in the last one in particular, because if you can't get into the server entry straight away, you can move on to the delay and it won't go back to the server.
Yeah.
Whereas in the one before it, you can't get into the server, you go on to the delay, I'll hang up there, then you can get into the server.
That's a good analysis. The last case will make its decision straight on, as opposed to the other statements which still run multiple things potentially side by side, or considering multiple things side by side for a longer time. It's easiest if we just look at the different possibilities, the different cases. What happens if the rendezvous starts and completes before the timeout hits? That means this rendezvous goes through. In the first case, I'm still in the abortable section. In the second case, I've made my decision. The second case, nothing can change anymore after that point. The second case, I already know that the SR statement sequence will be executed. Decision has been made. Same in the last case, decision has been made. In the first case, we have to continue looking. First case, decision has not been made. How this continues from here, right? You see why? In the first case, the entry was also only a part of the statement sequence which can be aborted, which means in the first case the timer is still running. And the timer could be threatening to interrupt the SR statement sequence. If this SR statement sequence is completing before the timeout hits, then it actually looks exactly like the other two cases. But if it doesn't, then the first case will behave differently. Then in the first case we interrupt the statement sequence and executing the whole statement sequence as T afterwards. Okay, that's quite different. What happens if the rendezvous starts before the timeout completes? No, sorry. The rendezvous starts, but it doesn't complete before the timeout runs out. Now, if the rendezvous has started, that means in the last case again, decision has been made. Last case is already completely determined how this continues. In the first two cases, in the first case, it also has been determined, because we said that the server entry returns only after the timeout hits, which means the timeout hits in the first one and will kill the statement sequence afterwards, completely. And it, again, executes the ST statement sequence in the first case. Middle case, we still have to keep looking, because the delay is still going through, and we can try to withdraw and go into the entry, or the entry completes. Timeout occurs before the rendezvous even starts. Is that easier? Last case again falls immediately into deterministic outcome. Delay until triggered kills everything else. First case is again also decided. Delay got through. I don't have to worry about anything else. ST is being executed. Yeah.
Is that all deterministic? Like,
is that all deterministic?
Exactly what's going to happen?
Yes.
Pre-combination. So
yes.
That's not even special, really.
Yes. If those assumptions are holding. So the assumptions that, for example, the timeout occurs before the rendezvous starts. If that's the case, this is exactly what happens. This is completely deterministic. Yeah.
But for any of those assumptions, it's deterministic.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Except
Well, hence we can discuss that here so precisely. So this is actually exactly what happens. The point of the exercise is that you are interpreting those statements precisely enough that you can actually understand what's going on here on the screen. So, where were we? We still have to determine what happens in the second case, right? And that depends now whether the statement sequence completes before the rendezvous starts. If that's the case, I'm completing my abortable part in the second case, in the second column. And the statement is complete. If this does not happen, if the statement sequence does not complete before that one, I can go back and get the entry through. And that can also happen after ST is partly executed.
So going back to case 2.
Yep.
So in the middle one,
Mm-hmm.
the forwardable statement isn't unforwarded until the rendezvous completes.
Yes. Okay, that's one of the reasons why I keep this kind of programming away from second-year courses, because it looks so deceivingly easy, but this is asynchronous transfer of control is a fairly dangerous operation to actually really understand what's going on there. So, now just a little bit of reflection. Asynchronism in Ada and real-time Java. What do we need to do in both of the cases? Asynchronous transfer of control enabled regions need to be explicitly marked and declared as that. No surprise there. Some regions are always deferred from asynchronous transfer of control. There is some atomicity at play. Some things cannot be interrupted. Also not a big surprise. Exceptions are supported in both of these cases. And asynchronous events can be triggered by the environment or by your own tasks. Usually, for asynchronous transfer of control, it's triggered by your own task. That's the point of it. Right. This is where things are getting a little different. In Ada, you have interrupts and asynchronous transfer of control schemes as different mechanisms. Asynchronous transfer of control is embedded into the family of select statements. Basically, one of the classical effects of trying to reduce the number of keywords in a language, so everything is selects. Yes, you can argue metaphorically this is all related, but I think some of the select statements are actually quite different from a classical select statement. In real-time Java, everything is embedded into the exception scheme. One size fits all. Exception handling is sufficient for everything, including asynchronous transfer of control. How is the handler identified? Again, exception handling, or you can have a global handler for interrupt handlers. Interrupt handlers in Ada, of course, are not subject to being propagated in any way. Interrupt handlers are set globally. If you have a dynamic real-time environment, you can change them. If you have a Ravensky real-time environment, then this is a one-time event. You can only assign them at declaration time of your system. Okay. Summary of all the asynchronous stuff which we had. Understanding interrupts, exceptions, atomic actions, and asynchronous transfer of control. Interrupts between tasks. Any further questions about this level of transferring control in an asynchronous way? I think you need more practice for that one. You need to start now exercising this on your boards and gaining experience with what actually happens there. We'll come back to handling asynchronous events in the context of scheduling. This course has a substantial chapter on scheduling for obvious reasons, and we will embed sporadic events, asynchronous events, into the overall scheduling scheme in a predictable way.